So we're gonna both talk. We just like we're figuring out what we're gonna do downstairs, and we're gonna do this like we got it down. We're on the road. So I'm gonna talk first a little bit about Maisie and what inspired the book, and then we have some other ideas. Maybe we're gonna talk about research and process, and maybe we'll read a little bit. So anyway, I'll start with Maisie. So I was originally inspired. I read Up in the Old Hotel by Joseph Mitchell, which is a wonderful collection of his work from the 1940s and the 1930s through the 50s. Mostly in the 1940s, essays that he wrote in The New Yorker that were then collected in this book. And I read his essay that he wrote about Maisie, and I just became immediately fascinated with her. And she was just this incredible woman who was deeply flawed. She was very boozy, she was bawdy. She ran this movie theater down near the Bowery during the Depression, and she was just this remarkable person who was known as the Queen of the Bowery, and she ran this movie theater, and she sat in this ticket booth all day on Park Row, and she just knew everybody in her community, and she was really involved with all of these people, and she was really entrenched in it. But she also loved going to the bars, and she was kind of violent, and she had a potty mouth on her, and she was just great, and I loved her. But the thing that was really remarkable about her is that she worked from 9 in the morning until 11 o'clock at night, and then when she got off work, she would walk the streets of the Bowery, and she would help all the homeless men. And she was she called ambulances more than anybody else in New York City. She used to carry, just to save their lives, she used to carry these little bars of soap, like hotel soap, so she could hand it out to them so they could go and wash themselves up. She was the only woman who was allowed into men's shelters, across the threshold of men's shelters, because she was always checking men in there. And she saved lives, and she really was kind of a patron saint to the Lower East Side. And I read about her, and I wanted to know more, and because we're in the year that we're in and the life that we're in, I felt like I was going to get to know everything about her immediately, because surely I could Google her and then I would know whatever I wanted to know. But in fact, I couldn't even find a picture of her. I did find the original essay. There was an article about her when she retired from the movie theater. There was an obituary in the New York Times, and there was also an article that was a reporting of her memorial service at Riverside Chapel. And that was it. That was all I was able to find. And the original little line drawing that appeared in the New Yorker that was an illustration of her, but even that was just a little black and white sketch. So I just had very limited information. But in the article when she retired from the movie theater, it said that she was retiring to write her memoirs, which either never got written or got written but never got published. And that was the original idea for the book. I thought, I wish that I could read them, and then I realized I could just write them. And so and I'll just talk a little bit more about it really quickly. So the structure of the book, ultimately what it became was, the spine of it is a found diary, and in the year 2000, and then it's as if somebody is tracking down anyone who might have known her, and so there's an oral history wrapped around the spine of this diary, because again, I wish that I wanted more information, and then I just realized I could just invent people to ask questions about her too, and then they would answer me, and then they showed up in the book, and then they wanted to have their own story in the book. So that's how the book was formed. It was actually very natural and very organic, and yeah, so that's it. So that's the beginning of it.
It is so good. It's so good that the image of Maisie sitting in that booth is so vivid.
Thanks.
in my head. She's just such a wonderful, great character.
Thank you.
The book is really good to read. Maisie. My book is also set around the same time during the Depression, The Muralist. And I also came at it from history. My last book, The Art Forger, was about art. And I wanted to write another book about art. And I had always wanted to write a book about the Depression. And when I started doing research to look into this, the one thing that kept popping up was the WPA, which was Franklin Roosevelt's program to put the country to work during the Depression. And I thought, oh, this is really cool. I can write about the Depression and the WPA, and this would be great. And I started looking into it more and discovered that there were a number of artists who were working for the WPA in New York City who later became very famous. So they were working for the WPA in the 30s, and they were young, they were crazy, they were jumping in and out of bed with each other, they were smoking pot, they were drinking, And they were also creating the first great American school of art, which is abstract expressionism. And you may have heard some of their names, Mark Rothko, Jackson Pollock, Lee Krasner. And I thought, wow, this could be really cool. I'll write a book and I'll have them as characters in it. And then I did a little bit more research, and I discovered that Eleanor Roosevelt, who is my favorite historical person ever, was the one who was responsible for convincing Franklin that he should include artists in the WPA. So I thought, oh, that's even cooler. I'll have Eleanor Roosevelt be a character in my book too. So that started the whole thing. And as I'm sure you've experienced, and all of my books have some history in them, and they all have a lot of research. And what I find is that when I start doing the research, some people do research to look for facts, but when I do it, I'm looking for a story, and what are some elements that might make good stories. And I found two of them that started this book. One of them was Eleanor Roosevelt's greatest regret at the end of her life was that she hadn't convinced, actually the word she used was forced, Franklin to accept more refugees before World War II. And the other piece was I discovered that, the WPA, so it was a depression program. And when World War II started, there was no need for these programs anymore, so they all closed down. And the WPA hired artists, and they painted murals, and they painted paintings, and did graphics, and all kinds of different things. And there was one aspect of it that was called the Easel Project. And people worked in their own studios and painted these paintings. And they would turn them in to the WPA once a month, and that was how they got their check. And when the war started, they just closed down all of these programs, and there was a warehouse that was full of these paintings. And the bureaucrats, because they didn't know what else to do, decided to throw all of the paintings out on the sidewalk as trash. Now, this is a really bad thing, unless you're a fiction writer, and then it's like, oh, this is a really good thing. What if? The question, what if? So what if there's a character who finds a box of these paintings that had been thrown out and hidden somewhere for 70-odd years, and inside the box there are paintings that might be by Mark Rothko, Jackson Pollock, and Lee Krasner. And so I'm like, oh, that's really cool, so I'll have a character in the present who does that, and then my character in the past will be working for the WPA. She'll be hanging out with Jackson Pollock and all of those guys, and it turns out that her best friend is Lee Krasner, and her lover is Mark Rothko, and she is trying to get her Jewish family out of France before World War II starts, and she is helped in this endeavor by Eleanor Roosevelt, and makes enemies with all of Eleanor's enemies, and she mysteriously disappears.
Did you know right away that that's what it was? Like sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's quite all right.
Yeah, but I want to know, you were like, okay, I have all these elements. Or was it more organic and you hammered it out?
It's easy in retrospect to talk about it as if it all followed. But no, it was a total hammering and revising and getting feedback from my editor and revising again. And I use all of these different methods to do it. And I would say, I don't know, you'll have to say how many there were for you. I'd say every page of this book was rewritten at least 20 times. And so many different stories.
Wow. I think for mine, because I decided, I'm going to create this thing that has all these moving parts, so all the sections, so it's like little short diary entries and then these little short interviews. And I remember once I figured out what that was, I was like, I'm a genius. I just made it so easy because I have all these parts and I can just move them around however I want. But then but then I was like, oh my God, I just made it so much harder because I can move them around wherever I want. And how do I know they're in the right place?
Right,
that kind of thing. So it was really about the timing. So I don't know if I like rewrote everything 20 times, but I moved things around a lot, and just sort of it all felt like chess pieces to me.
Keep track of it?
Oh, I mean, I knew I had a timeline of somewhat like things that I wanted to have happen. I didn't have like, I wouldn't say I had a spreadsheet, but I definitely had, if you look at, all writers' journals or just like journals of crazy people. So I kind of just kept rewriting and moving things around. But then at some point you just memorize all the parts, right? Like exactly what happens in every single one of your chapters. I mean, don't ask me now. Yeah. But when you're done,
at the time, when you're in the middle,
when you're in the middle, or when you're at the end, it's sort of you walk around with this very pregnant feeling that you have all the parts and you know exactly where they are and that kind of thing. So I think it was more about the placement of information.
And you kept it all in your head?
And I kept a lot of it in my...
You had a lot of different pieces.
I did, but I wouldn't have tried talking to me during that period of my life. I mean, I have to like go away and hide and not talk to anyone at all. I don't know, how do you keep track of all your stuff?
I don't keep it in my head. Yeah. My head's not as good as yours. Yeah. So I actually use kind of math principles to write my novel. I actually have a PhD in sociology because every novelist needs a PhD in sociology. It's a prereq, right?
Yeah.
You have one too, right?
No, not even close.
One of my areas was statistics, and I kind of have a math brain.
Yeah.
And so I do use spreadsheets to keep track of all of the characters, particularly when I was interacting fictional characters with historical characters, trying to keep where everybody is in place. I use bubble maps to keep track of the relationships between all of the characters, and also so I can see if there's like a link that's missing. I use scattergrams. This is so crazy. I use scattergrams to assess the tension in each scene in each chapter. But then I use a very, very sophisticated method that I'm sure nobody in this room is going to be able to understand because it's so sophisticated. Multicolored file cards.
Wow.
That's how I keep track of everything. So, like, Alize is the main character in the past, and so her story was on red file cards. And then Danny is the character who finds the box in the present that makes her try and find out what happened to Alize, and she was green file cards. And then Eleanor Roosevelt was yellow, and Mark Rothko was purple. And each one, I know it's crazy. And they're all see, you probably don't know this either, but every story, every plot, every subplot, every character arc follows a normal curve in the Shapiro method of novel writing.
Oh, you need to teach like a class,
Yeah.
like an online how to write. Do you do it?
I haven't done it online.
Like that
but
master
I've taught-
class from
yeah,
James
yes,
Staples.
Yeah.
yeah.
Holy cow.
But see the normal curve, and then you break it up into the 4 major act points and all the plot points. Then you can break it into another set, so you have 16 different plot points for each story, and that's how you know which file card. So
And you don't feel like
the,
trapped by that, or it makes you feel
Well,
safe?
It makes me feel safe. But then what happens? So I do this once, and I put them on my dining room table, and then I move them around until I can get the story right. And of course, it's not really right, but I feel safe because I have one way through the story. And then I write it, and then I read it, and I go, this sucks. I guess I better go back. This isn't really working. And then I redo all the normal curves, and I have to buy another pack of multicolored file cards.
Now I know
and
what
I
to
do
get
it
you
again.
for Hanukkah this year.
And so it's a process of process.
Wow. Yeah, I feel like I'm writing a book right now, and we've both been on the road, and so I haven't been able to work on it, but I've been thinking about it, and I sent myself a list of like all the chapters. Like I was like went for a really long walk one morning, and I was like, these are all the chapters that are going to be in the book. After I'd been thinking about it for like 3 months or something, and I have like 90 pages of it written, and I just like was like, this is it. This is going to be the order, and that's like enough. Like just to have like.
And will
the
it
subject.
be the order?
I think it'll be really close to the order. I hope. I mean, you know, you don't really know when you're writing a book. You always think when you start a book it's about one thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then what did you think your book was about when you started it? And then when you get to the middle point, you're like, oh, that's what it's about. And then you get to the end and you realize, like, no, I actually was really about all of this other stuff that I didn't know about.
And then there's a bunch of other stuff.
And then you get edited a bunch. But at least I think I always have a point to write to. So for me, like, knowing that I already know what the beginning, middle, and end are of the book, and not in any big plot point kind of way, but just emotional. I think I sort of travel more by emotional moments rather than plot moments. So I know, I don't want to say what it's about. Well, you know, it's coming out in 2 years, so maybe you won't remember. But I just know, like, I just felt like the character needed to feel one way at the beginning and one way in the middle and one way at the end, and that was enough for me to know that I could write the whole book, that I felt like.
You're much more courageous than I am.
I,
See, I'm such a coward that I
No.
need all of this
Well.
to think that, and I too have my beginning, middle, and end, but I also have, 332 other plot points
Yeah.
in between
But-
that I may or may not get to.
But it's brave to even to start a book, so I don't know
That's
if coward
true.
is the right word, but it is about finding, the things that make you feel safe, probably more than anything else.
But the knowing the end is, I always have to know the end, and then it never really is
Is the end. No,
It
of
never
course
is.
not.
But I need to know that there's at least one through point
Yeah.
that will work. But a lot of people start books, they have the image of a character or a place or a theme, and then they sit down and write them, and I don't know how you do that.
Well, I think what it is like what the stakes are at the beginning of your book, and you think, and what for you it was there's a mystery behind these box of paintings, and by the end of the book I and the reader are gonna know what's the story behind that box of books, and that's sort of enough
And then
to go
it
on.
turned out not to really be all that
About
important. That really wasn't what it ended up being. That was kind of like it turned out that was like a little thing I had to tie up at the end.
Yeah, for me, I knew what the last line of the book was very early on, and then by the time I got to the end of the book, it's now the 13th, the last line of the book.
That's still
Because-
pretty close.
It was really close because I was like, oh no, that character does not get to have the last word, and I realized that Maisie needed to have the last word.
she does.
Yeah, so it was really that. But knowing like for the whole book that I was going to write to that sentence, it's that safety. Whatever we need to make us feel safe, because writing fiction is such a terrifying. It's a terrifying act. Not that we're heroes, because we're not heroes. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just saying that it's a really scary thing. I'm assuming that a lot of people in this room are writers, if you're here, right? Yeah. It's scary, right? It's super scary, so.
And what you were saying that made your book so you thought that you had set it up, but then you had so many options of how to mix it up. And that's the thing that's scary, is when you start a book. It's all options. I mean, you can do anything, and that's where the multicolored file cards come in, because every one of those, gets rid of possibilities.
Right.
And then I feel safer about it.
Yeah,
Because
interesting.
it's not the whole world. It's just the cards on my dining room table.
I think it's more like because my work is really voice driven, I have a lot of voices that are competing in my head. And so it's just a question of getting to all of them. And whichever voice is sort of the strongest, then I go, oh, you're talking right now. And then I just like write it down and then make sure that character or person is addressed throughout, as far as I can take them. And then another character will show up and want to be addressed.
So do you write linearly?
I mean, I try to. The book that I'm writing right now is it's first person. And it's just her, the whole book, which is sort of terrifying, just to have one character to rely on.
Especially first person.
Yeah, but mostly I'm writing linearly with her, but I'm having a couple stories from the past are showing up. When I wrote the Milsteins, I wrote 150 pages before I ever got to from different family members' perspectives, and then I went back and threw in Edie, who's the
Really? That's interesting.
And so because I was watching her from afar through all the other characters' eyes, and I didn't know, Anyway, I'm assuming that anyone knows what, now I'm 3 books ago or 2 books ago, whatever it is, but
That was
yeah.
such a great book. Edie was just such an amazing character.
Thank you, but she was like terrifying to write also because she was scary too. So I think it's for me it's so character driven that to organize it too much would be sort of, you know, you can't put a rainbow in a bottle. You know what I mean? Like they're like, you can't do that to me. You have to just let me be. So
well, the thing I find so interesting is you talk to different authors, and there's clearly no way to write a novel. Everybody does it differently, and what I find is that, you know, like I start with plot, and you're starting with the voice of the character, and then but you have to do both. And then you have to also get in, you know, the place and the writing's got to be good. You got to get your themes in, all of this kind of stuff. And you can't really, unless you're, you know, some total savant, you can't do it all at once. So it almost doesn't, you know, so everybody finds their own way of starting that they feel comfortable with. And then, so I do the plot first and the character second. You're doing the character first and the plot second.
You know, there's like that famous Edward P. Jones story about how he like doesn't write his book for 10 years and he just thinks about it for a really long time. And then he just carries it all in his head and he has it all memorized. That would be the savant, right? Yeah. He has it all memorized in his head, and then like finally he sits down and he just writes it all down, and then it's done.
Do we believe that story?
I believe it. I do believe it. I don't know if I believe it. I don't know if I could, I mean, I feel like I can carry some things in my head. I could carry a couple pages maybe, but I don't think I could carry 10 years for 10 years. Also, I would just want to do it. Like I would want to sit down and write it because I really do. You enjoy the experience of writing?
Yeah, but it's funny, you know. It's like all I want. Like now I'm on tour, and so I had to put. I finished the first draft of my next book. Very rough first draft, and I want to get back to it. But I know when I do get back to it, those first couple of days are going to be pure agony. And I'm going to have to dredge it back up, and it's just going to be miserable. So I do
That's
really
where I'm
enjoy.
at right now.
Yeah, right. So I do really enjoy writing, but sometimes I think I enjoy having written.
Yeah.
You know, like the end of the day, when I've written well, that's what I like the best. That staring, that getting up, and also the first draft is extremely painful for me. Yeah. And so now that I finished the first draft, now I feel like I can really get in there and do that messy, fun work.
Yeah, I have so many friends I have several friends who've remarked to me recently, who published, you know, 3 books, 4 books, whatever it is, that they just want, like they don't feel like being published like they do because they want it, but they also just are so enjoying being in the middle of it, like feeling that it's like that dangling,
and there's nothing else,
sexy feeling that like, that it's great, and so like they don't actually want to finish, like they keep inventing things for their characters to do so they can just keep going on forever.
Yeah, well, it's scary, you know, to be published, to be edited, and then, you know, your book comes out and, you know, it's very nerve-wracking. Now, is anybody going to like it? Is anybody going to buy it? What are they going to say about it? And when you're writing it, you're controlling it. I mean, it's your, I mean, that's one of the things I love about it. It's totally you know, and you can make, you know, you can get people to do whatever you want them to do. But once it's out there, you know, there's no control.
Well, that's why it should be fun while you're writing it, and you should like the thing that you're writing about, and you shouldn't feel bored by it, and you should feel, you know, you should sit down and be excited and enjoy it. Not everyone is like that. There are some, you know, people who are, you say, oh, I like having written, but I even know people worse than you who really don't like it at all, but and they really just want to, but they can't, you know, not do it. But for me, it's like such a joyful experience. It's as pure as it gets, because now having, how many books have you written?
I've written, I'm on my 12th, but 7 have been published.
7 have been published, yeah. So this was my 5th, and the publication process is so incredibly, it's time consuming, it's draining. You are nervous if people are gonna like it or not like it. And so once you finish it and hand it off, it's like its own, it's just its own thing. So the purest moment is really just in creation. That's it. And then the rest of it is just Goodreads reviews.
Oh God, don't even mention that. I won't look.
Yeah. You won't. I compare it to like cutting.
Yeah.
For authors.
That's why.
Reading your Goodreads reviews.
Yeah. See, and I don't like pain. But I also think the writing, for me, the coolest, like people always ask, you know, I had written, I had published 5 books that nobody read, and then I wrote 3 more that couldn't even get published, and then I wrote The Art Forger, which took off. So I was 60 years old and got my big break. And people always ask me, you know, how did you keep doing it? You know, one answer was, it's the only thing I wanted to do. But then I think, what I really love about writing is when you get into the zone and hours disappear. Like they're just gone. And I decided that I have an addictive personality and that I'm addicted to the zone, which doesn't happen all that much, but that if it happens, you know, once every 2 weeks, that's enough to keep me going, to try to get to the zone again. And that's the only explanation I can come up with as to why I would keep doing this.
Right, yeah. Because
It's for the zone, it's the high. It's like this, the greatest high is not to be present, which is like the opposite of what you're supposed to be doing now with all the spirituality stuff, but that's kind of what it is.
Right, and it's better, the day that you've written and it's been a good day is better than any other day that you're gonna have.
Yeah.
And the day that you didn't write is like the worst day you've ever had in your entire life because you didn't get it done or you didn't. And you can't really complain about it because nothing really happened.
Yeah.
Like it was just another day to every other person on the planet, but to the writer, the oh so sensitive writer, it's like it's devastating that you didn't get any work done this week, whatever it was. It's ridiculous. Anyway.